Hello there. We're going to talk about lesson 9, the atom. We're just going to get into just the basics about what the atom is made up of, like what are the parts of an atom. So we've learned that atoms make up molecules, and atoms and molecules are what make up everything in our world. All matter, whether it's a solid, a liquid, or gas, is made up of molecules, which is made up of atoms. All right, so Mr. Blackman's joke here is, why can't you believe what an atom says? Because they make up everything. Haha, good dad joke. All right, the first thing that you're going to do is watch the Atom Brain Pop video. You have the link to the Brain Pop in your Google Classroom assignment. The link that is loaded up in your notebook is not the correct link, so you're going to need to access the link in Google Classroom. I will also put that in the chat for you. The username for BrainPop is PortagePSNMS. The password is PortagePS. Here is the word bank. So after you watch the BrainPop video, you're going to learn all of these words and what they mean. And then the activity for this slide is to place the correct words with their definitions. Okay, so you've watched the BrainPop video, and now let's kind of talk about the parts of an atom. So again, this is just a basic overview of what makes up atoms. We call them subparticles, okay, or subatomic particles. Sub meaning parts of the atom. There are 3 main parts to an atom, so we'll go through those in this instructional video. So this model of an atom shows where those 3 parts are. We have the protons, the neutrons, and the electrons, and they're found within the atom. In the center of the atom, this is where the most of the mass of the atom is. Atoms are not very massive, they're very light, but the mass is found mostly in the center. And that's where you're going to find 2 subatomic particles, protons and neutrons. Electrons, which is the 3rd part to an atom, they can be found on the outside of the atom moving around the nucleus. The nucleus meaning the center. So the nucleus holds the protons and the neutrons and is in the middle of the atom. And an electron will circle around the nucleus pretty quickly. They move actually very fast around the nucleus, and it's much like how planets orbit the sun. Okay, so let's talk about each part individually. Protons, like I mentioned before, are found inside the nucleus or the center of the atom. They have a positive charge to each one. So kind of like electric charges, atoms have positive charges, parts that are positive and parts that are negative. Overall, the atom is going to have no charge, a neutral charge. Protons have a positive charge, and we'll talk about the negative part of the charge of the atom in a couple slides. But protons have positive charges. One way that I can remember that it has a positive charge is they both start with the letter P. Protons start with P, so it is positive. So that makes me think that which one has the positive charge? It's the proton. Their mass is super small. It's so small that people had to make a new unit of measure for them called the Unified Atomic Mass Unit. Different types of atoms will have different amounts of protons. For example, hydrogen has only 1 proton, whereas carbon has more than 1 proton. I think carbon has 6. You'll have to look on the periodic table. We'll have to look that up and see if I'm correct. So carbon would have more protons than hydrogen because it's a different element. It's a different atom. So different atoms have different types of, or different amounts of protons. Okay, neutrons are particles that hang out in the nucleus with protons. Okay, so neutrons and protons are both found in the middle of the atom inside the nucleus. Now, just like what neutron sounds like, neutral, that means that they have no charge. They have a neutral charge. So they're not positive, They're not negative, they're neutral. Neutrons, they think that they're all that and a bag of chips because they're just a little more massive than protons. So most of the mass of the atom is found in the neutron, although it's not a lot. All right, so we've been talking about the center. We call that the nucleus. This is the center of the atom and contains the neutrons, which are the most massive part of an atom, and it has a neutral charge. And then the protons, which have a positive charge. They make up the center. The volume of the nucleus is very small. So the nucleus does not take up a whole lot of space. Even though it's the most massive part of the atom, it's not the largest part. It's very small, therefore it's very dense. Okay? The larger part in volume, the space of the atom is really empty space. So an atom is mostly empty space. All right. However, we have these electrons that are circling around the nucleus. They're super duper small. In fact, they have almost no mass at all. It would take almost 18,000 electrons to equal the mass of just one proton. Electrons have a negative charge to each one. So remember, I said earlier that protons have a positive charge and atoms overall are neutral. That's because electrons have a negative charge and they balance each other out. Neutrons, remember, have neutral charge, no charge, so they don't even come into play when it comes to charges. So the electrons are negative, protons are positive, they balance each other out. Okay? They're in constant motion around the nucleus of the atom. The space where they move around the nucleus, which is mostly empty space, is called an electron cloud. An atom, and this is why they're neutrally charged, an atom will usually have the same number of electrons as it has protons. For example, if an atom has 31 protons, which is positive, in order to be neutral, the atom will need and will have 31 electrons to balance the positive charge out because electrons are negative. So they end up equaling out each other. So atoms don't have a charge. Okay, so using that information and the information from the brain pop, let's see if you can fill out this chart. So use slides in this lesson to fill in the table. You have some information to help you out in each row. You're going to need to identify the part of the atom. Remember, we mentioned protons, neutrons, and then the electrons. Okay, so what do you remember about each of those to help you figure out what goes in the chart? The location in the atom. So where did I say that protons were? Where do they exist? Are they in the center? Are they on the outside? Where do they exist? What is the mass of the part of the atom? So you don't have to put a number, you just have to put relative. So we know that whatever this part of the atom is, that's the smallest mass. So is the proton the largest mass, or is it in between the smallest and the largest? What would be the smallest mass? We know protons down here. So what had the smallest mass? Would that have been the neutron, or would it have been the electron? So once you figure that out, then you can figure out the part of the atom that goes up here, the third part. And this one would be inside the nucleus. So it's kind of like a domino effect. Once you can figure out one of them, you can kind of figure out the rest. And then what charge do each have? Remember I mentioned there's a little tip, proton starts with a P. So what charge does that have? Once you figure that out, then you might be able to figure out the charges of the other two. So good luck. Let me know if you have any questions.